Today we are continuing our study on the life of James. This is James the disciple. There are multiple James throughout the Bible. There are two disciples by the name of James, actually. This is James the elder, or James, son of Zebedee, the disciple. This is not the James who wrote the book of James that you might be familiar with in the New Testament. This is the disciple of James, and as we're going through his life, we're kind of camping on four different big stories that James was involved in. Most of them are not exclusive to James. Most of them, we see other disciples involved. We obviously see the character of Jesus involved. And so today, we are really going to be talking about one of the biggest stories where I think we start to see Jesus' character and Jesus' purpose for his disciples and for those who follow him. And so I think today we will learn great things about Jesus' character, and I think we'll also learn something that each and every one of us can be challenged with today in the world we live in today. So we're going to dive right in to Luke 9:51. So if you have a Bible, turn to Luke 9:51. It's also on the screen if you don't have a Bible. And we're going to go ahead and read the first three verses. It says, "As the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. And he sent messengers on ahead, who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him, because he was headed for Jerusalem." See, Jesus was headed for Jerusalem for what would be his final Passover, and what would ultimately culminate in his death, burial, and resurrection. Now, Jesus knows this, and the disciples have heard this talk of Jesus' kingdom coming. Once again, many of the disciples thought this kingdom that was coming was a military kingdom or a political kingdom, that somehow Jesus was going to topple the Roman Empire, because they lived in a world amongst the Roman Empire. Guards everywhere, even the temple. And so at this time, James and John and the disciples are thinking that as they head for Jerusalem, Jesus is getting ready to set up his kingdom, when really Jesus knows that this is his last Passover, and he is the sacrifice this time. And so as we continue this part, Jesus is journeying. Now, here's what we know about Jesus. Jesus doesn't always have to journey through Samaria, but he chooses to, right? And in this story, he chooses to head through a Samaritan village, right? Now, in this day, it was common to send people ahead of you, right? Because Jesus is traveling with 12 other disciples. But historically, we might even believe there was much more than 12, in the sense that there were a lot of people that followed Jesus. There were 12 that were his core disciples. And so people are following Jesus, they're getting ready to come into a town, and they send people ahead to prepare things, because unlike today, they didn't have microwaves where they could just pop some Hot Pockets in and take care of Jesus and his disciples. They had to actually prepare these things. That was a joke. Okay, there we go. Yes, we're awake now. The rain has not done that to where we can't even process humor, but here we go. The disciples step into this situation where they walk into a Samaritan town, and they have to ask for people to house the disciples, to feed the disciples, and to feed Jesus while they're on their way to Passover. This is all very important to the plot of this story, because the Samaritans and Jews don't get along. Now, I know we've been down this road before. I did a sermon on the woman at the well, and I did a sermon on the Good Samaritan. And we've kind of talking about Samaritan-Jew relations. So at this point, if you've heard it already, I apologize, but we have to go down because it's really good backing for the story. But Samaritans and Jews did not get along. They believed different places of worship. And in this day, where you worshiped was vitally important to whether or not what you were worshiping was correct. So in the Jews' mind, their worship took place at the temple. And in the Samaritans' mind, their worship took place on a mountain in Samaria. And so these two conflicting things continue to cause tension. And we even read in the story of the woman at the well that when Jesus is talking to the woman, she says, we're not supposed to associate with one another. So Samaritans and Jews, there's this cultural idea that they don't even talk to each other. They're like asking her for water. We don't talk to each other. Why are you talking to me? Yet Jesus sends his disciples ahead to ask for someone to give them food and a place to stay. Really? Like, let's turn the tables. Would it be that way in Jerusalem? Let's say the disciples are at their house, and some Samaritans coming through to head to their worship, their biggest festival of the year, are coming through with their keynote leader coming through and saying, hey, can we have a place to stay? What would they say? Most likely, based on everything we know, they would totally shut the door to him. Well, let's see how this concludes. This continues. In verse 54, it says, when the disciples, James and John, saw this, they asked, Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven? Fire from heaven to destroy them. Now, James and John had this nickname called the Sons of Thunder. And this nickname was because they were hot-tempered. That's what most scholars believe. They got angry quickly. That was James and John's MO. And so they were given by Jesus, I think in Mark 3, the title of Sons of Thunder. Now, this has huge implications on this story because their immediate reaction, to them being denied provisions in this place, was to call down fire from heaven. That's ridiculous, right? It's ridiculous to think that that would be the first conclusion. But here's what we can learn if we look at some different biblical translations. Here's another Bible translation from the New King James Version. Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them? And then here's 4 very important words. Just as Elijah did. Okay? So at this point, we have the disciples quoting an Old Testament story as almost the idea of we can do this because Elijah did. Now here's the important thing we got to know. Elijah's story probably happened in the same exact region. If not, like literally within miles of where they are standing. And they would have known this because being good Jewish boys, as they grew up, they would have learned all about the Old Testament scriptures to the point to where each and every one of us have the great luxury of owning a Bible or the ability to own a Bible. They did not have the ability to own a Bible. Instead, they had to memorize it. So they would have known this story from memory. And this probably would have been a story that they would have memorized out of their hatred towards Samaritans. Okay? Let's read just a little bit of the story. I'll give you a little background. There's a king. His name is Ahaziah. And this king falls down, gets injured. I'm just going to give you kind of the brief Cliff Notes version. Falls down, gets injured, sends some of his messengers to go consult Baal and say, hey, will I recover from this injury? On the way the messengers are going, Elijah stops the messengers. He hears from God, and God tells him to go interrupt the messengers. He interrupts them, sends them back to the king, and the king's like, who stopped you? And they're like, well, we don't know, but he looked like this. And then the king's like, that's Elijah. Go get him. So he sends a commander and 50 people, and that's where we'll pick up the story. Right here it says, then he sent to Elijah. This is 2 Kings 1:9, if you have your Bible. It says, then he sent to Elijah a captain with his company of 50 men. The captain went up to Elijah, who was sitting on top of a hill, and said to him, man of God, the king says, come down. Elijah answered the captain, if I am a man of God, may fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50 men. Then the fire fell from heaven and consumed the captain and his men. Okay? Story continues. At this, the king sent Elijah another captain with his 50 men, because this king is really smart. The captain said to him, man of God, this is what the king says. Come down at once. If I am a man of God, Elijah replied, may fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50 men. Then the fire of God fell from heaven and consumed him and his 50 men. So the king, once again being smart, sent a third captain with his 50 men. Now, this captain had a little more tact. The third captain went up and fell on his knees before Elijah. "Man of God," he begged, "please have respect for my life and the lives of these 50 men, your servants. See, fire has fallen from heaven and consumed the first 2 captains and all their men. But now have respect for my life." The angel of the Lord said to Elijah, "Go down with him. Do not be afraid of him." So Elijah got up and went down with him to the king. He told the king, "This is what the Lord says. It is because there is no God in Israel for you to consult that you have sent messengers to consult Baal, the god of Ekron. Because you have done this, you will never leave the bed you are lying on. You will certainly die." See, the king was already injured, and he was already bedridden. And he says, "You won't leave the bed. You'll die here." This whole story is taking place in Samaria. This whole story is probably taking place very close to where the disciples are. And the disciples, knowing this story, living in the region, would know that that story took place there. Just like right now, we know stories, we know where they took place, and it gives us a reference, background reference. Well, unlike us reading the story, they're involved in the story and they know the context. They know what happened in the Old Testament. So their immediate response is, let's be like Elijah and call down fire. Let's do it. What's Jesus' response? But Jesus turned and rebuked them. Then he and his disciples went to another village. Jesus rebukes James and John for even presenting such a violent idea. For even presenting this idea. Now, we can also get some more understanding of Jesus' rebuke when we look at some other translations. In the NASB, it says, "You do not know what kind of spirit you are of. For the Son of Man did not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them." Jesus takes James and John, and as we've learned through this whole thing, or at least especially last week, James and John and the disciples all are constantly missing it. Jesus picks like these 12 disciples and says, "You can come be close to me." And then he says, "Hey, I'm going to take 3 of you, James, John, and Peter, and I'm going to let you guys be like the closest to me. You're going to be involved in everything, really. There's going to be a few times I'll walk away and I'm on my own, but for the most part, you guys are here for everything. Even the most intimate moments, you guys are here for it." And James and John miss the point. Like, they totally miss it. And in this situation, James and John miss the point to where Jesus says to them, "What spirit are you of?" What does that conclude? That concludes that Jesus is saying, "You're not on my team right now. Right now, what you're asking for is not my will." That's hard. That's got to be hard to hear if you're a disciple. That's got to be humbling if you've devoted your entire life to follow this guy, and now he's looking at you saying, "Hold on, you've been following me this long, and you still don't even know my purpose is not to destroy, but to save." Wow. Wow. See, Jesus championed the Samaritans. But Jesus even went further. Jesus championed the prostitutes. Jesus championed the greedy tax collectors. Jesus constantly said, okay, what we have defined as the cultural norms in the Jewish tradition maybe aren't the cultural norms that you should have. Maybe you should be open to eating a meal with the tax collector or the prostitute. Maybe you should be open to walking through Samaria. Instead, what the Jews would do is they would cross the Jordan River twice to avoid Samaria, adding sometimes up to a day to their travel. It's ridiculous, just to avoid a people group that they did not get along with. But Jesus says, no, we're going to go through Samaria. How uncomfortable would that be if you were a disciple? You grew up as a Jewish boy being told, we don't associate with these people. They're evil people. They're unredeemable, maybe even. And Jesus steps on the scene and shares stories like this. He healed a Samaritan's leprosy and commended the man for his gratefulness in Luke 17. He accepted water from a Samaritan woman and gave her water of life in John 4. Continuing in John 4, he stayed in that woman's village for 2 days and evangelized to her neighbors. He made a Samaritan the hero of his best-known parable. Later, he would command his disciples and each and every one of us to preach the good news in Samaria. You think that's there by accident, Samaria? That's there very intentionally in the Great Commission. Because he didn't want them to miss. Samaria is important. You guys have written it off, but I haven't. You guys have just decided, hey, fire can come down on them. And I've said, no. We can save them even. So this is a huge story for us. Because as we start to understand that Jesus is this guy who wants to redeem, who wants to save. But we live in a world where we constantly see things being destroyed. We see toxic things all the time. This changes our perspective. As we've done throughout this whole series, we take a moment to just close our eyes and reflect on some questions. I want to continue that today. So we're going to close our eyes right now, and we're just going to have a time of reflection. Now, it's obvious that the Samaritans and Jews had relationship issues, and right now what we're going to do is we're going to ask questions regarding Christians and non-Christians. How have you seen Christians destroy their relationship with non-Christians? How have you seen Christians save or build up their relationships with non-Christians? What can you do better to save and not destroy? Okay, we can open our eyes. These are questions we should be wrestling with, right? See, in this time, the Samaritans were viewed as unredeemable. Really, the system of thought that James and John had to call down fire, and the system of thought, the spirit, if you will, that they had, was not uncommon. It was most likely even held by the other 10 disciples. James and John were just the really vocal ones, the sons of thunder, if you will, the ones making all the noise. This is really a big piece of what it means to follow Christ. It really is. And here's what I mean. I think it's really dangerous when we isolate ourselves from the very people that Christ calls us to reach. I would say that if Jesus came back to our culture, he probably wouldn't find things very different than the Samaritan and Jew relations. It would be different in the sense that it's become a lot broader. There's a lot different sections of people. But ultimately, where are we as a church? And when I say where are we as a church, I say I'm as much part of the problem as anyone. But here's what I wanted to do for this, but I didn't have time to. What I wanted to do is I wanted to walk through a mall and just have a mic and go up to someone and say, what's the first thing that pops in your mind when I say church? And just see what it was. And most of you are shaking your heads like you're right. It'd probably be a lot of negative comments, and it'd probably be a lot of positive comments. There'd probably be some people who said, church and Jesus saved my life. Like if it wasn't for it, this is where I was and this is where I am. Then there might be other people that would say, it has destroyed my life. I felt nothing but judgment from church. I felt nothing but hatred even from the church. Felt nothing but destruction from the church. This has huge impact on the way we live every single day. Every decision we make, we make with the idea, am I destroying or am I saving? Am I excluding myself, or am I offering hope to a world that is dying? Like, Christ calls us to step out and start building a bridge to the hurting and hopeless. Every one of us should be on that bridge, constructing it, saying, how can we share this hope with you? Share this amazing story of redemption with you? And often, we end up being known for what we don't like or what we destroy. I don't have to sit and harp on this long for you to start flashing in your mind all the different groups of people or sinners or whatever you want, all the different groups that we have alienated as a church. That as soon as they walk in, they don't feel comfortable here. Why is that? Why? Why is it that Jesus could sit down with a tax collector and a prostitute and they felt comfortable, but the very followers of Jesus hardly ever felt comfortable? He was constantly putting them in hard situations. Walking through a Samaritan town, that is a hard situation. I'm just asking questions. I'm just saying we need to be challenged here in our relationship to the world around us. At this time, the worship team is going to come up and we're going to continue to worship. But here's what I want us to think through. You are the church's reputation. I am the church's reputation. Each and every one of us have a part to play. Some of you are thinking, this is such a big thing. There's nothing I could do. But let me tell you this. I've sat down with people before, students especially, who have this idea of what church is because of what they've seen, what they've heard from other people, judgmental people, people who just don't want to preach love to them, but instead want to preach a gospel of hate or a gospel of destruction to them. And I sit down with these students and I say, well, let's start to talk about this. Can I share this verse with you? Can I share this? I don't want to share my opinion. I want to share the Bible. And we start to dive in, and it's like, in that moment, I can totally change a student's perspective on church. Is that student going to become a Christian? I don't know. But each and every one of us have someone we know that needs Christ, that needs that hope. And we are the church. You are the church when you leave this building. The church is not a building. The church is this group of people. If we were meeting down the road, it would still be church. If we were meeting in a school, it would still be church. If we were meeting outside, it would still be church. We are the church. What are we going to do to change the church's reputation from calling fire down from heaven because we don't believe people are redeemable, or saying, hey, no matter how far you are gone, you're redeemable. No matter how far you've gone, you are redeemable. I believe God could save you. Like, could you imagine for a moment looking at a crazy leader of Libya and saying, you, the person who are killing your own people right now, committing genocide, you, based on the Bible I read, you're redeemable. Most of us can't get there. Like, that's a hard thought to have. But the reality is, this is the gospel we've decided to follow. We have to start living it. We have to start challenging ourselves. We have to start pushing ourselves. We have to start making ourselves uncomfortable. I would even say consistently uncomfortable, because being a disciple of Christ is anything but comfortable. All right, let's stand and continue in worship. Let's pray. Dear Lord, may each of our lives offer hope to a broken world. May God be with us and actively rebuking us when a spirit of destruction is our purpose. Let us love. Let us love. Let love consume us. Let your love flow through us. Let us see the entire world as redeemable. Let us see the slaves as free. Let us ultimately extend your hope Let our lives intersect with people who are far from God. Let us be reminded of our purpose. Let us see God's grace as amazing, and let us extend that grace to the world around us. In your precious name, amen. Go in peace.
Someone come and save my life. Maybe I'll sleep.